You are listening to Happy Jack's RPG Pod. Pursuing the RPG hobby with reckless abandon.
Why, hello, and welcome to season 26, episode 20 of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
I'm Stork.
I'm Clara.
And we're waiting on Claire, who is supposed to be here, and she is stuck in traffic. So, in this episode of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast, Andreas writes in about different PC factions, Graf writes in about world building with fantasy races, and Andreas writes in about gaming ADD. Before we begin, let me just say that we don't want to ignore what's been going on. We are supporting our friends who have been treated very badly for an extremely long period of time, and we hope that this will make the change that needs to happen. How does that sound? Is that an agreement? A thumbs up? Okay. All right. If you'd like to email us, you can email us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. That's happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. We have a forum, happyjacksforum.com. That's happyjacksforum.com. We're on the social medias, happyjacksrpg, all one word, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, MeWe, and we also stream the show live. Go to happyjacks.org/live on Fridays at 7 p.m. Pacific time, 7:18 p.m. Pacific time, and you can watch the show there. And I'm going to keep. Does one of you want to read the first email? Because I'm going to keep an eye on the thing for when Claire shows up.
Claire's waiting to be let in.
She just showed up.
There we go. I can do it. Someone else can.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, Claire. All right. I can do first email.
Okay, go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay. A question about games with factions. Hi, Stu and crew. I just realized that one of the games I'm trying to work on would be much more interesting for the players if there were different factions around them that they could align themselves with and against. This makes me think of Vampire and naturally Stu's 2 campaign.
Two campaigns. Yeah.
Do you, Stu, or anyone else with that kind of experience have any suggestions on how to generate a web of factions with interlocking interests? I have in the past and found my intrigues often tend to be too simple and resolve without dragging in the players. That long plots make for a great campaign, or they have been so convoluted they lost interest and never managed to untangle even a bit of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Cheers. I think that read and I just biffed it. Sometimes they're too simple and they're just too obvious alignment, or they're too convoluted and it's hard to choose an alignment.
Yeah, some systems like Vampire, that's all baked into the system. And if you're dealing with a system that doesn't really have that, then you got to come up with a way to do that. Like D&D doesn't really have that. It maybe in certain cases, and that led me to thinking about the fact that if you really want to do something, say you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, because it's a big dog on them, the logical thing that I would do is that base all your factions on the classes, and all of the character classes would be in different guilds. So the fighters would be in a fighter guild, the bards would be in a bard collegium, the mages would be in different schools, and therefore they all have different interests and different education and different motivations going on by virtue of their class, and that would count as a faction without it being too convoluted, because the fighters would go to a school and learn a whole set of skills that are completely unrelated to what the bards are doing, and therefore but they would still be similar because they eventually they're supposedly training to save or be in service to the empire or whatever it is you're working with. So they would have enough in common that they're not completely fighting against each other, but their classes would then dictate their faction.
I think you could. Oh,
go ahead.
That was just my thought. Go ahead.
I think you can also pull a lot from I guess first I would say look at your players and look at what their interests are in. If you're playing with people who are super lawful good, or not, or just have a lot of that, it might be interesting to throw some moral ambiguity into your system. So you can throw in things like people having, in a rebellion or those sort of things, and that can build factions that way. You can also just steal from, literature or other media, in that, like, Romeo and Juliet, two factions. For no particular reason either. My favorite is when, like, my favorite is I did a game a long time ago where, like, everyone was kind of forced to pick a side, and everyone thought it was this big problem, and it turned out it was like two noodle houses were competing, and they had the same recipe, and they thought they'd stolen it from the other. So, like, you can do something like that, and it kind of makes things, I don't know, it depends on the direction you take your game and your story, and what your players are going to want, because I think that's why they would lose interest or not detangle these things.
There's even another spin on it, which is the Harry Potter thing, which is you sort of all divided by alignment, I guess, for lack of a better term. But you're all, house, frat, sorority, whatever it is. But so sororities and frats are basically alignments, right? There's the evil, there's the lawful good, so something like that would also work. But again, you'd have to sort of, if you're talking about D&D, work it into your game where they're all in a school together at different sororities.
Well, I think it's also important to note that factions exist in life, and they're all mixed in. There's not like a place where all of the all the liberals come from and all the conservatives come from. Like they're all everywhere. So I think it's always interesting in terms of world building if the people from opposing factions aren't necessarily easy to identify, and are just kind of ubiquitously everywhere, because then it kind of, it's a little more immersive as opposed to the very, like, this is a story, trope of, the blues wear this and the reds wear this, and we don't like that.
When I started working on Vast Dominions, which is the sort of steampunk science fiction setting that I was working on, someone had mentioned it, sent me an email wanting to have a copy of it. So I sent it to him, and I looked through it before I read this email, and I'm like, oh, look at that. Look at all these factions I put in here. And I realized when I was this was a little different because it was a historic setting. But I went back, because this takes place in like the 19-teens. So I went back through Wikipedia and I said, what were the hot button issues at that time, right? Women's suffrage, what do they call it? They call it the conservation movement back then. I don't remember what they had. I don't remember if that was the name for it. But right around like Audubon and all those things, it was all happening around that time. So I came up with like 3 or 4 or 5 different organizations. And the Temperance League, of course, and that which was kind of out of the same vein as the women's suffrage movement. And I went through and made various organizations that would exist within this world about these various things, and I made pro ones and I made con ones, and then I also subdivided it even more and said, here's an organization that believes this, but here's an organization that believes this and thinks that killing is okay to make that happen. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I made sort of like a dichotomy of where people sat on these various things in these different organizations. And I think when you're trying to come up with factions, for them to be meaningful, I think you have to look at the game world you've come up with and figure out what the problems are going to be. What are going to be the major issues? Because that's what drives people to organize. Mm-hmm. So if you have, two, I don't know, colleges or 2 orders of mages, and they hate each other, you need to figure out why they hate each other. Not just that they're opposed to each other, but there has to be some real world reason in the context of that setting that got these 2 organizations to be on opposite sides of each other. Either they split and became 2 separate organizations, or the facts on the ground made them decide to organize into these 2 different organizations. So I think that when you're trying to develop some kind of faction system, which I think is a really handy thing to create tension anyway. I mean, if you look at almost every White Wolf book and every Onyx Path book, I can't think of one that doesn't have factions in it. I know Werewolf
that's
does.
a hallmark of their system.
Yeah, it really
A
is.
lot of that is baked in.
Well, it's because they don't really do traditional like tabletop RPG races.
Right.
So they kind of built it into like, I guess you're Brua now because that's what you were as a human, but now you're a vampire.
And
however that happens.
That's the neat thing about it is they have tiers of these kinds of things too, right? Because you've got on the high level, you've got the Sabbat, the Anarchs, and the Camarilla, and those are your different factions. But then within each of those organizations, you're going to have various clans that also love to fight with each other. So you have multiple levels and the cross stuff that can happen. It's like, oh, well, I'm Gangrel. Oh, that Gangrel over there, Sabbat. We really don't like the Sabbat, but they are Gangrel. I mean, you can see the conflicts that can happen both internally and externally.
Do you guys ever watch Peaky Blinders?
I started to.
It's about an Irish gang at the turn of the century, and it's all about factions, especially back then. I mean, you hung out with your fellow Irishmen. You didn't talk to others. You Catholics, there were Protestants. The police were a gang. The Italians were a gang. The Jews had a gang. I mean, everybody was in their own little factions for a lot of different reasons. And then sometimes it was just, just like West Side Story. When you're in a gang, you follow along what the gang says.
Oh.
You don't even think about it anymore. So
Gangs of New York.
Exactly. and that's Peaky Blinders is a lot like that in that there's all these little factions and strata and stuff within the factions, and sometimes people just do what they're told to do and don't question it because bad things happen if you question. So that's the thing about factions is that whoever's in charge has a reason, or maybe even it's an old ancient reason that's been around. It's so long ago that people don't even remember why they hate each other anymore, but it's still a thing.
Noodles.
Yeah, the noodles. I hate the noodles. They stole our recipe 35 years ago. But
there's also.
Good.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. But Peaky Blinders is an interesting show to watch because of that. And plus, it takes place over time, a lot like Downton Abbey, where you follow this gang as it was really sort of scrappy and young and just came off the boat from Ireland to much more established businessmen as the seasons roll by. And it's fun to watch how the world changed around them and how they adapted and how they became like legitimate.
Nice.
Okay.
There's also something to be said in player engagement when it comes to things like factions, giving them a reason to even want to engage, whether that's because the factions already align with their own ideals, or if, maybe they're presenting it in a way that seems really appealing and they happened to do the players a good turn. So like, the anti-magic league just happens to get your players out of a tight situation, and so they're like, oh yeah, we'll help you out in return, and then they realize this is what's going on. But I think also it's sort of important to make sure like to have factions that people can choose to be part of, rather than like leaning to something they have no control over.
Boy like that, he killed your brother.
Well, I was just thinking because you mentioned, a lot of the gangs of New York and from Peaky Blinders, I assume, a lot of that's provincialism, right? It's like you're from this neighborhood, you're from this religion, you're from this area, you're from this group of people, so therefore you belong to this faction. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I liked, I've never played it, but New World of Darkness Vampire basically has like 2 different levels of factions. Because there's your clans, but then there's other, I don't know, sects, I think they call them.
There's are you talking about the paths?
No.
Or are you talking about the religion that they have?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Sects?
I don't remember what
I think
it's
they're called sects.
I don't
remember.
Me,
but I like the fact that makes it even more complex. Because there's like, okay, because if you make a character and you're a gangrel and you're not leaving the clan. I mean, you can try, but you're still going to be a gangrel. Right, so you have that, but then there's this other thing. You can like pick. Oh, I'm going to be one of these guys in Kanu, or I don't even remember what they were now. But they had so there was sort of, and if there's more than one, and you either suggest or compel the players to take 2, then you have that opportunity of having their 2 alliances getting to cross paths. Where it's like, oh, I'm supposed to do this thing for this group I belong to, but I also belong to this group, and they certainly wouldn't want me doing that. You know what I'm talking about? The sort of conflicts that could happen internally, I think would be interesting as well.
Go watch The Godfather. 1, 2, and 3, and it touches on all of that. You know, the death of the patriarchy and the changing of the times and the factions and power struggles in between the family. It's an old story. I mean, Romeo and Juliet, same kind of thing, but it is interesting. I think it's important though to remember that in these modern times, a lot of people don't like to be forced into making choices, even that you was that what you were going to say?
No, I wanted to point to you, but I have no idea where you are on the screen.
Point up. Point directly up. There you go.
This.
Well, you're pointing at Stu for me.
That's me. Yeah.
But you also have to honor the fact that some people aren't joiners, and maybe their characters aren't joiners, and so they may be throwing wrenches into your faction works all the time, and that has consequences as well.
I'm actually playing a game right now with the City of Towers game that
Jason?
I'm in. Yeah, Jason. I know his handle. It's probably okay. It's probably fine. Anyway, so Jason is running the game, and he put in a. So we played Kimmy's Decima. At the beginning, and one of my questions was, you idolize somebody in the area, who is it? And we decided, since we're playing in the world of Eberron, that it would be somebody from one of the Dragonborn houses. And so I just loved everything to do with this Dragonborn house. Kind of like some people follow royals, I follow this Dragonborn family. And we are now currently on a quest to embarrass that family, because the character I play is also a changeling. And the dragon and there's a lot of people that don't like changelings in that world, and there's also a lot of people that don't like this other race. And so, like, even though my character really likes that family and is not a joiner, like, they are very much a rogue, like, I go where the money is, like, they still have that internal logic of, if it's against something that I believe in, I'm still going to fight it. And I think that if your characters are kind of rich that way, you can play on those kinds of internal biases and judgments that the characters have as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It would be fun in some games to have, the family come over and go, there's a stone in my shoe. And I need you to help me remove it. If you don't, there will be consequences. I know it's the worst Godfather imitation ever. But
on this the day of your daughter's wedding.
The day of your daughter's wedding.
Go to the towel, that helps. But, and they can compel you. It's like your daughter could be, threatened, or you could be threatened if you don't follow along and toe the line. And that happened all the time in mafioso families. There's I think it's a Godfather, he goes, every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Whoa.
All right.
I tried.
Sorry, it sounded like you said Frau Brucher.
All right, thank you, Andreas, for the email. We appreciate it.
Funny.
And the next email is World Building with Fantasy Races from Graph. Who would like to read this?
Well, this kind of intersects with what we just did. I can start it.
Okay.
Sure, why not?
All the emails are short this time.
Graph.
Not like the last episode.
This one is long.
This is not long. It's not a long email. Oh my God.
What?
You kids today.
You're new. You didn't have to read a whole Jib email back in the day.
I request this email.
4 pages.
I request this email in tweet form or TikTok. I would like it in TikTok form, please.
This email makes it on the show. You may drink whenever you like, presuming it brings you joy.
And we also
restrict your imbibement. Imbibement?
Oh, my drink is all the way over there.
And we also used to read 7 to 9 emails an episode. Now we only do 3. Episodes used to go 3 hours.
Yeah.
Claire remembers those days.
I think we had a 4-hour episode once. Yeah.
I think I was on that episode.
Just go on.
All right. Many players, especially GMs, write their own settings, create homebrew rules, and some put them out on the internet, or gasp, even publish them. I'm in the process myself again, and cannot help but question the common standards of the genres I'm world building for. A hang-up I myself have not found many answers for are the plethora of different races in high fantasy. In any good literary fiction work, the different elements serve a function for the story. I believe the same is true for RPGs, as they are fundamentally about telling stories as well, only the process is very different. An obvious function is to create a quote-unquote sense of wonder. This has been central to hundreds of years, from Mediterranean myth, Chaucer's tales, up to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Another one is to create a challenge for the hero, which cannot be overcome by ordinary people. Hercules battles the Hydra, Beowulf meets Grendel, and even today, heroes delve into dungeons to kill dragons. In both cases, the fantastic race or monster fulfills a role as the other, in quotes, and that's actually interesting. Be it as down-to-earth but violent orcs, wise but aloof elves, or majestic but dangerous dragons. These evergreen themes get lost, though, when RPGs do one thing: make fantasy races and creatures into playable characters. It would not be good for a story if a monstrous creature beats itself up on its own. But then fantastic races fight against monsters, the former usually devolve into stand-ins for humans. Due to the unavoidable rule sets, RPGs are fundamentally written as quote-unquote hard systems, not quote-unquote soft systems, which is necessary for a sense of wonder, at least to a high degree. Side note, I borrowed Brandon Sanderson's lingo here, and I assume most listeners are somewhat familiar. If not, his YouTube is an awesome resource for world building and character design. I was not aware that he did that. I should probably check some of that out, since I have all this time these days. We all know how mundane and atmospheric... okay, I'll start that sentence again. We all know how mundane the atmosphere can become when players know the stat blocks of everything that they talk to or fight with. There is not much left to wonder about, when every player knows how large elves usually grow, how their culture works, how many points they are better at magic than everyone else, and how their damn sleep cycle works. Detail is the death of any wonder. So, while it is a pretty rad idea to invade pre-Norman conquest Europe with dimension-hopping orcs, I ask myself if the same stories could not be told instead of orcs with humans from a very different culture, as long as they can be identified as the other. To a degree, I do not see why not. Therefore, my question to you all: what benefits does the inclusion of playable fantasy races in RPG settings and rules even have, in your opinion? Why should I include or leave them out? Any reasons for choosing one or the other in your settings will be appreciated as well. Best of wishes from Germany. Stay healthy. Graph on the forum. He brings up some interesting points.
I ran a lot of fantasy games where I said you can only play humans.
I need to preface this by saying that Tolkien casts a really long shadow, and it affects everything from role-playing games to fantasy literature, and it's really hard to escape that shadow. It's still sort of baked into it. We don't even consciously know that we're emulating Tolkien, but we do at all turns. And I think he brings up an interesting question, which is, what if our fantasy weren't based on Tolkien? What would our fantasy look like if Tolkien wasn't around anymore, or never even appeared? You know, what an orc was?
This was my minor in college. So, I guess I'm trying to figure out like the best order in which to say the things I want to say. So the first being good at like my blanket advice on this is going to be, you're right. What if can you change things on their head? Yes. No one is forcing you to play D&D or any other tabletop the way the book says. I'm gonna get in so much trouble for this.
No, you're
but
not
like,
here.
Nobody, like, if your players are having fun, fuck the rules.
Yeah.
Like, go listen to...
Here.
Go listen to Changeling the Dreaming, and that is... Adam says it himself. He's like, I play Changeling the way you're supposed to play Fate, I guess. Or a PBTA. Like, don't, like, there's no reason that you should be held back by the idea that, like, oh, well, I guess the book says that elves can only grow to, 5'7"? Like, fuck it. But also...
Yeah, I like the rule that DMs don't DMs aren't gods. They tell gods what to do.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
do yourself a favor and look at non-Western literature if you're curious about other kinds of creatures in folklore. 1001 Arabian Nights is a really good place to start. That's pretty easy to find. Anything that comes from Japan at this point, it's you can find. In fact, even just if you want to stick to Western, rifle through through the Bible and the Extended Universe Bible books because they're fascinating.
Yes, I lost it.
I used the wrong term.
The Extended Universe Bible books. You mean the New Testament?
Yes, that. Oh man, I'm sorry. I mixed a very strong drink. But if you look through Jewish folklore, if you look through Muslim folklore, you're gonna find a lot of interesting creatures and things that can be used as stand-ins. My favorite being golems from Jewish folklore because I love me golems. Sorry.
He's behind a golem.
Cavalier and Clay. It's a book that did you read it?
I haven't. It's been recommended multiple times.
It's about comic book artists. There's all sorts of game systems out there that aren't D&D or that aren't Tolkien based. I mean, the Symbaroum is one that sort of deals with Eastern European. There's a lot of Japanese flavored stuff. But ultimately, when we play fantasy these days, everybody defaults to elves, dwarves, gnomes, humans, orcs, goblins, and that's all. I mean, they can reskin them and rename them. I mean, even Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever series had a goblin orc stand-in called the Urvils or Urviles. They're still, no matter what you call them, they're still there. An interesting thing to do is to try to come up with something that's not like that. You know, some of my favorite novels are written by Elie Moset, and they're all humans. But some of the humans have been isolated for so long, and some of them are older than others, but they're all flavors of humans, and they all have different factions, ideals, and some of them even have different powers. So it can be done and still be interesting.
Sure.
But somehow, because we're all still, Tolkien is ingrained us all that we still default to the elves live in the woods and they're magical.
Well, I mean, one of the points that he's talking about is the fact that these races shouldn't be playable because that is one of the things that sort of diffuses the wonder of the sort of exploratory adventure where you go out and discover strange new things and new people,
Absolutely.
right? And if you think about it, even Tolkien, except the hobbits are the player characters.
Yeah.
For the most part, everything else is not a player character. If you think about it,
you're supposed to feel that too. You're supposed to feel like a hobbit so that you feel small and helpless, and like this big, huge thing is happening around you that you have no control over.
And he never says, "Oh, this is what Elrond is thinking." I mean, those kind of things never happen. You don't know that he acts mysteriously, and you don't understand what he's doing because you're never given the insight.
Without context, yeah.
Right.
He did. So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm running a 5e edition game in my household, and they've divided the races into all kinds of things. But what I said was, these are the races that are quote unquote normal, and these are the races that are unusual. So you can play any of the races in the book, but all of these races are either secular or insular or they're solitary. You're not going to see them in a city. So if you want to play this race, you have to give me a really good reason as to why you're there in the city. Like if you want to play a drow, you have to give me a backstory that doesn't sound like Ari Salvatore.
But I've got two Thord.
If you look at Robert E. Howard's books, yes, they're a product of the time, and they're probably not real woke. No, they're not. But all of the people in them are humans. Some of them have devolved into almost Neanderthals. Some of them have lived for centuries, and they're ancient through magic. Some of them are just from different continents and have a whole different lifestyles and structures and religious beliefs and stuff. But they're all humans. The things that aren't humans are the monsters and such. And there's all kinds of monsters, but they're ostensibly not playable races. You just run into various flavors of human throughout the Robert E. Howard universe, and they're just as interesting as having an orc. Whether it's a devolved human or whether it's a really ancient human, represent, I don't want to say represent an elf, but they kind of, you don't need an elf when you have a human that can do that too. You know?
Oh, I full on built a system where I just like converted the race of like, I was like, all right, these are the orc style, but they were all mermaids, and I was like, this is the orc style mermaid. This is this like, I just converted the stats, because the reason that you play that, like, anyone picks races in games, I feel like, let me rephrase that. One of the reasons one could pick a race in a game is for the stats. If you listen to the Happy Jacks podcast a while back, they did with a round table of POC gamers. They talk a little about some of those some of that stuff, and so I'm gonna let them say that more. Let that restate a lot of the issues I have with just race and stats in games. But I will say that the reason that you should, like, I feel like the graphs brings up a little bit of like, hey, why should you be allowed to play a different race, period? And the answer is fun, I guess. I am forced to be a person a lot of the time, and I don't like it. So when I can, I would like to be a magical creature. And also there's a lot of studies that show that our role play especially builds empathy, and so it is sort of nice to be able to step into the shoes of, even if it's just even if it's a power fantasy, stepping into the shoes of someone who isn't you for a little while and learn those struggles or those successes. So no matter how you do it, it is worth playing races, especially if you think about it, being allowed to play monstrous races. And yeah.
You know, as you're talking to it, it harkened on another thing, which too is if you get rid of all the races, and anyway, if you get rid of them all, it gets rid of power gamers, and it gets rid of min-maxers because they're no longer like building.
No, it does not get rid of power gamers. They'll figure some other way to fuck things up.
Because I'm an elf, and humans don't get that, and then I get a charisma bonus.
They'll figure out another way. You don't worry. You don't worry about them. They'll figure out how to fuck your game over.
As a min-maxer, I take offense to that.
As a DM, we want you to.
Story.
You're all fucking humans, and you all start with the same stats. Now go.
Here's your starting kit.
Yes.
So
you may pick your weapon and your outfit.
So what do you guys think about monsters as playable characters?
Do it. I mean,
yeah sure.
It depends on the game, because if everybody's a human and you're a dragon.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely, like, if they're overpowered, then no, don't do that. But if they're like an awakened skeleton, or a
particularly smart kobold.
A particularly smart kobold with an intelligence of 10. That's still smart enough to be a player character.
Yes.
So, like, I think it can make for a more interesting campaign if you start to see the other as less othered, if that's, you know what I mean? Like, it's more nuanced.
Right.
So.
And then you can go back to making factions instead, because it turns out the other bad guys are the bad guys, and you can find out why and come up with diplomatic solutions, maybe.
Or fight them.
Diplomatic solutions, that never happened.
Take their treasure.
I also pitched to Stork before this started that I wanted to play a sentient hat riding a human, like a human puppet. So, like, whatever game is happening next, that's the character I'm playing.
Yeah, and I remind you, there's a movie, I think it's Meet the Robinsons, right? Where
I was just about to say.
That's right.
The hat is, spoilers if you haven't seen
No more
it.
Meet the Robinsons for you. You failed! That's what we should shout every time you roll a 1. You failed!
Oh, you're going to be hoarse by the end of the game.
All right.
I had 4 dice the other day, and I rolled all blanks. It was like, it's one of the symbol dice, one of the vampire dice, and they were all just blanks on them. I'm like, out of 4 dice, still couldn't hit it.
I would pour one out for my fallen comrades, but this is soda and carpet, so I'm not gonna do that.
What old lady did you piss off in a former life that she cursed you like this? I've always wondered. Like, you're a nice guy.
You don't know that.
You don't know that.
You're a nice person to me. And that's all that matters.
Fair enough. There's plenty of people out there that would disagree with you that I'm a nice guy, but whatever.
Bobcat said, a portion of player characters already behave like monsters.
Valid.
Is there a correlation between the players behaving like monsters and their characters behaving like monsters?
Right.
There's a meme there somewhere, like, the person's like, we I don't want to play an orc. They're mean and vicious, and then the next frame is torturing the. Tell us everything you know.
Right.
I was just doing it in character.
Right.
It's just what my character would do. Right. All right. Who would like to read Gaming ADD from Andreas? Is this the same Andreas? Andreas got 2 emails in the same show. That's funny.
I will read this one. Hi, Jackers. A conundrum. Like so many these days, I have been very focused on online gaming. I have decided I want to run a game, so I take down one that strikes my fancy. I start to read and take notes on potential adventure ideas. Then I listen to a podcast with a really cool AP, and suddenly I want to play that game instead. Not longer after that, having come to the not taking state again, I decide I need some bedtime reading and take down a new game. Guess what? Can you guess what happens then?
Yeah.
So far, I have yet to get any of these games started. What should I do? Is it an inherent psychological flaw, a sling of gaming ADD, or is it my problem I own far too many interesting games? Any suggestions on how to actually get to the starting blocks? Have you had this experience yourselves? I hope you are all well and stay safe. Drink! Cheers.
Common
I
problem.
did finish this already.
I was just telling Stu when we started too. It's like when Kickstarter first came out, there were all these options, and I kickstarted all these games. In fact, another one just showed up, and I'm like, and I'm never gonna play them.
No.
I like them, and they're neat, and oftentimes I read them for ideas and stuff, but I'm never gonna run them. I mean, it takes me a long time to master a game system, and after a while, it's like I don't want to start all over again. It's like learning multiple instruments. It's like I know how to play guitar, and I know how to play mandolin, and I play a little bit of piano. I'm not going to start on woodwinds, and I'm not going to start on brass. Why? It's too much
really
work.
attacked.
Well, it's like
Sarah,
a.
I was gonna say,
how many instruments are in your bedroom currently?
Different types of instruments. You can't just count
You-
all the recorders.
do you count Vibraslab?
That's not an instrument.
That's percussion. That's for monkeys. That's not people don't play.
Yeah.
that.
I played the
It's
fifth
like a
on the back.
didgeridoo.
That's a
I was
didgeridoo.
gonna say,
No, didgeridoo's
that I can
didgeridoo's
see
an
right now,
instrument.
6. Quiet you. But I was gonna say, do you master game systems before you run them?
Clearly, I don't. But I feel like I at least let the players. I should at least have a clue, right? And at some point, it's like, why would I run this in RuneQuest when I could just run it in D&D or run it in Savage Worlds, or because those I'm already familiar with enough that I don't have to. And is it that much different? I just after a while I got overloaded, and I'm like I'm never really going to do this. If I want to do a one shot about wolves, then I'll run the system that's designed that I bought that's about wolves. But I don't see I'm going to do that.
See,
It's
I
not a
don't go to
character
Kickstarter when I'm drunk anymore. So
it's
that-
like
I was gonna say, I have so many games that I purchased because of Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And you just you go and you read the story and you want to support the people that are making the game, and it's like, this is great. I'm gonna start this, and you get it and you're like, oh yeah, I bought this 6 months ago.
Yeah.
you know
Or
what?
2 years
This is
ago.
this is crazy. This is absolute craziness. What stamp collector do you think sits at home anguishing over the fact, oh my God, I should really lick that stamp and put it on an envelope? None of them.
Different
You're
thing.
collecting.
Different
It's
thing.
fine to just collect.
But games exist to be played.
Stamps
Look,
exist to
I-
move letters.
It's like I collected comic books for a long time too, and I collected them because I wanted to read them. And then I'm like, well, I might as well hold on to them. But I really wanted to read them first.
Right.
I was not one of those guys that bought them because they were collectible. I bought them because I was into the story arc and into the stories, and then just held on to them. So it's that way with games for me. You buy them because you want to read them, not because you're collecting. Ooh, I gotta have the next edition. I'm never gonna play it. It's just gonna sit here. But
And
I
it's
buy
not,
them with every intention of at least reading them.
it's
And
not
then-
like you're not getting anything out of them. You are. I mean, you are. That you're going to read through it and you go, "Oh, those are really interesting GM tips," or "Look, that's a really interesting way of handling
I don't read them
damage."
anymore, Stu. That's
well,
where
then-
I'm coming from.
Then you're
Well, you
just
got time
collecting.
now.
Then you're just collecting.
I stopped.
I was gonna say, nothing has ruined my bank account more than Drive-Thru RPG, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Because do you know how many Magical Girl games actually exist? Yeah. So, and as far as like, how do you get as far as answering the actual question, which is like, how do I do? The answer is don't feel bad if you don't. And two, if anyone had the solution to getting a game group together consistently once you had the game designed,
Polyamory.
yeah, there's no
Polygamery.
Yeah, polygamery.
It doesn't work, Claire. But yeah, if anyone had that solution, like, we wouldn't have a podcast anymore, I assumed.
Well, I can tell you, if you're interested in playing a game and you want to play the game, and you're afraid that you're going to like go, oh look, shiny, and go off on something else, organize the goddamn game. Get the players you're going to have, figure out what night of the week you're going to fucking play, and get a goddamn start date and say, we're going to start playing this game on this date. I need characters by here.
Yeah.
And then you're committed.
It galvanizes you as the GM too, because there's nothing like a hard out or a hard date.
Yeah.
Together.
Here it's a little different, because Kimmy will say, okay, what game are you going to run next? I'm like, I'm thinking about running maybe Call of Cthulhu. Okay, well then it's like, oh fuck, I guess I'm running Call of Cthulhu, and at that point I'm done, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm going to get the book out and better read the fucking thing. But if you could make that commitment and involve other people in it, I think you're more likely, unless you're a real asshole, to follow through.
I have the problem with getting the people on board.
Well, that's part of the problem, yeah.
Something else that I did with my game that didn't have like, a weekly show or whatever is before we did experience. So before everybody's checked out, I'd say, okay, that's game. When are we meeting next? And we'd all get out our calendars and we'd all get out our phones, and I'd make an event and invite everybody, put it in the Facebook group and be like, okay, this is our next date. Your characters are about to level up. Please have them leveled up by this date and submit it to me so I can say no, or that's fine, or
right.
Gosh, I didn't know you could do that.
Right. What does that spell do? I better look that up.
Is this gonna break my game? Shit.
And sticking with the music analogy, nothing galvanizes a music group more than knowing you have a gig.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly,
Absolutely.
all the solos get memorized, and suddenly all of the Mizuki parts that you were faking get studied, and all of the words that you were just glossing over get looked at.
Adding at the rest of us, please, Stork. We feel added at.
I was gonna say,
No, but I also know this about myself too. It's like the only reason I learned to play recorder is because I knew I had to do it for a show.
That's right.
And that's really that's me. If I don't have a deadline, I won't do it. I'll just noodle around and I got close enough and it satisfied me. But if I you need to have the guitar memorized for this gig, I'll memorize it. Learn to play guitar. I will. But if listening to my own devices, not gonna happen.
Yeah, when Sue said he was leaving the wives, I was like, shit, I better learn Mizuki.
Right. There's nothing like the fear of sucking on stage to really galvanize you to wanting to learn to get your shit together.
Yep.
It's like 10 million times worse too when you're recording. When it's like, hey, we're recording the album, and you're like, I should learn the words to this song.
Have I been singing it wrong this whole time?
Yeah. That is not my experience.
So I would say.
Now I'm feeling attacked.
So I would say if you want the fear of God as a GM, sign up to run a table at a local convention.
Yep.
Boom!
Oh
there
my
you
God.
go, right there.
You're
There you
absolutely
go.
right.
For
The
strangers.
analogy really does work,
Oh my god.
And it's just like memorizing different systems too. That's it. If you're like,
I
if
just
you
gave
really
Clara
want
a
to run
panic
a
attack.
RuneQuest, sign up to run a RuneQuest game at the con. If you want to learn to play trumpet, make sure you schedule yourself a gig where you're playing trumpet and you'll learn it.
I was supposed to have a game for a convention right after this show, and it got canceled 2 days ago.
Oh no!
So, I was super prepared. I was like, I guess I gotta learn how to GM again.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's true, and because I think just like memorizing and running a new system, it's work, right? And just like learning a new instrument, it's work.
Yeah.
And if you don't have to rehearse, you don't. You get close. You're like, all right, well, I'll figure it out when we get rehearsals again. But left your own devices, you're like, It's just a lot of work. I don't
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
you should see how much dust is on my viola.
You have viola?
You bet. It's left-handed and everything. I can almost play a scale that doesn't sound like a cat in heat.
Stu's a multi-instrumentalist. You
Not
play
really.
guitar, bouzouki, and...
Those are all stringed
Bass.
instruments.
Oh, well.
Those are all plucked stringed instruments.
Yeah.
It's not that much. Just learning different chords. I mean, bass is different, especially upright. Fuck upright bass.
But Claire plays... You play bouzouki, piano, guitar,
Guitar is
mandolin.
fine. I play bouzouki, guitar, bass, mandolin.
Well, bouzouki and mandolin are the
piano.
same. Yeah.
Well,
They're
they're
not,
close.
though.
They're close.
You can't. Well, you're okay. So you can't stretch to make chords the way that you make them on a mandolin on a bouzouki, unless you have stew hands, which I do not have. And you can't squish your hands to make bouzouki chords
That's
into
true.
mandolin chords. So you have like there is a learning curve switching from one to the other. But yeah, I play a few things.
It's probably very similar to the difference between playing electric bass and playing an upright bass.
Yes, it is exactly like that.
It's just a different
It is
physicality.
exactly like that.
Same theory, but different physicality.
Yeah, and you have to, like, if you have one in your muscle memory, good luck.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And okay, so that's bringing it back to games, because I remember back in the day when there were new games coming out all the time, we would start mixing up our rules. It's the polygamery. Sometimes you forget who you're talking to and which rules apply to which person. So it's, occasionally your Dragon Quest rules might creep into your Rune Quest rules. So
Oh yeah.
if there is a problem if you have too many game systems, you start to get really confused about what you want to do, and then eventually everything becomes a homebrew.
Well, and that's why it's important to set down a table rule. Like, at the beginning, say, either, if I say a rule and I'm wrong, just write it down and tell me later so we can keep the immersive quality, or if I say a rule and I'm wrong and you know it, please let me know so we don't play incorrectly.
Right.
And those are two very different philosophies, but it's important that you communicate which you are to your table.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to play this rules as written, or are we just going to have fun?
I was gonna say another really good suggestion for just getting your fucking game group together is like one of the game groups I'm in runs on a quorum system, so we have a pool of 7-8 players that can play, and we have a pool of 7 or 8 players, and then if we get 3, we play every other Friday. So there's this
Nice.
So we're doing Descent into Avernus, which is the D&D module. So it kind of, like, a lot of it doesn't hinge on character, which is helpful, but it means that there are going to be weeks when I can't show up, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm just not playing today, and I'll catch up on the story the next game, and we just sort of hand wave away where the character was. It just
That was a
works out.
revelation to me with Stu. That's what
I did that in the
Stu's
first D&D game I ran, the 4th edition.
Because we used to like jump through so many hoops to like figure out where that other player went. It's just like they're just not there.
They're not
You're
there.
Like, but
They've never been there.
they're not
Except
there.
when they
And-
show,
and-
except
and-
next week, then they've
it
always
didn't
been there.
break the game.
No, it doesn't.
We were always
really-
like, Strider is off in the next town working on something, and it's like Strider just isn't there today, and nobody cared.
Yeah,
And that has
yeah.
to
You're
go
in the
to
9th level.
Necromancer.
Sure, you're in the 9th level of a dungeon, but he's just not there. He had
Just
to
not
go.
there. I'm like, you
He'll be
can
back.
do that? Mind blown.
I had a GM that would actually award experience for the most ridiculous explanation of what happened to you.
That's funny. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that.
Like, I had one guy that decided, oh, I failed my Constitution roll, so the fear effect took me. So I screamed for 2 hours until I threw up, and then I decided I wanted to clean it up. So then I had to go find a broom closet, and he tells this whole story that takes like 10 minutes. And I'm like, just take your 100 XP, shut up, let's get back to combat.
When I ran GURPS in college, of course this was in college, it's like, where's so and so's character? Oh, he's in the corner. He has diarrhea. He can't fight.
As the victim of that excuse, yeah, okay, fine.
If you've ever had really bad diarrhea, it's a good excuse.
It is.
You don't want to get into a fight when you have bad
You
diarrhea.
don't want me in combat with you right now. You really don't.
Or maybe you too. Maybe you want me on the other side.
Yeah.
I will
Get into a
pull on
fight with someone.
everything
What
they
is
love.
wrong with you?
Everyone's slipping all over the place.
All right.
Oh my god, I'm sorry, I just looked at the chat.
Oh no!
I cast explosive diarrhea. Thanks, Eric Odd.
Yep.
Erica, you're perfect.
All right.
Yeah, but yeah, like a quorum system works really well to get just like the weird part is we've had games with only 3 people playing, but we've almost always had the max because there's something about knowing it's gonna happen and that you really can't get out of it that kind of makes you want to go. So
Yeah.
it's helpful. Or start a podcast because apparently that's how I get game groups to happen now.
Starting a podcast, make sure that you spend plenty of time on games.
And also because there's people watching, you make sure that you show up and do the game too.
Right.
A lot of people be like, I don't feel good today, I'm not going to game, and it's like, nope, you're on a podcast. People are tuning in.
Eric Odd's on fire. I cast summon excremental.
I was gonna say people watch
An excremental that needs to be made up into a monster. An excremental.
not anymore.
Well, instead of a mud golem, it's an excremental.
What was it? Golgotham. What's the thing from?
Gotham.
Was it the Golgotham? That was the giant shit
From
monster.
Dogma, right?
No, it's from Dogma. Yeah, I think it was I think it was called a Golgotham.
Golgotha was
that was where
hill
it came from.
Golgotha was the hill where people were
Right.
crucified.
Oh.
Or Jerusalem.
Golgothan is what it's called. Golgothan.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Golgothan.
Yeah, the shit demon.
The shit demon. I literally looked up Dogma shit monster on Google, and that's what came up.
That's right. I missed that movie. I need to go watch that movie again. Is it available streaming anywhere?
I'm sure it's kevinsmith.net.
Go to canistream.it.
That never works for me.
Really? Here's another one, justwatch.com, that works.
Oh really?
I just Google it. I just is something available on streaming?
Dogma.
Holy shit! I don't remember this in Dogma. I haven't seen Dogma
The
in a
shit
very
monster?
long time.
That's the one that comes out of the bathroom toilet, as opposed to the the kitchen toilet.
Yeah, it comes out of the bathroom toilet.
I'm starting to notice a trend when I do the advice show, and that is you always bring up a movie I haven't seen either ever or since I was in high school. So now I'm just.
But Claire,
Oh,
you're old. And you're young, so you don't understand. I mean, he and I were out of college by the time you were born.
That is true. Wait,
I got nothing.
Yeah.
that's not quite true for me, but by the time I was in high school, you guys were both out of college.
oh, here's a quote. Here's Kevin Smith's tweet from 2019. Dogma is personally owned by Bob and Harvey Weinstein, who bought the film from Disney in 1999 and licensed it to Lionsgate for theatrical, and then Sony for home video. But those deals predated streaming and have lapsed. Bummer, as 2019 is the 20th anniversary of our release, so that it is not on streaming services. At least it wasn't in August of 2019.
It's not. It's, according to my Googles. So you have to buy it.
Well, that's a shame. What would it?
You just got to go to a yard sale where somebody's dumping all their old gaming books, and you could probably find a copy of the DVD of Dogma. As well.
Right.
You just said.
All right, we should probably call this.
Oh, probably.
All right.
Now we're talking about shit demons.
Right.
Listen, you
Yeah,
can make a
don't-
golem out of anything, right? Claire,
That
you
is
can
true.
You can make
Yeah.
a golem out of anything. Why not?
We are Fonzie jumping the shark.
Right?
Anything inanimate.
You can make
Is
a
that
shark
Bob
golem.
over your shoulder, Stu?
Bob the Skull. Yeah, I want to put little yellow highlights in his eyes.
Oh, that'd be fun. You might-
Kimmy thinks I'll ruin
you
it
might
by
know an
trying to do
artist
that.
who could paint some runes and shit on there too for you.
Oh, yeah, that would be cool. That would,
Sure, he loves being Bob.
next time you're around, I'll give
I'm
this
talking
to
about
you.
Matt.
I know you will.
Oh, right. Thing. Here we go. Stop. Oh, wrong one. Thank you for joining us for season 26, episode 20 of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
I'm Stork.
I'm Clara.
Oh, that's funny.
Okay, one of you
wrong
go
forever.
first. 1, 2, 3, go.
I'm Claire.
And I'm Clara.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week at 7:05 p.m. Pacific Time, next Friday at happyjacks.org/live. Until then, stay safe, and we will see you in a week. And we got, I think we have, there might be APs this weekend, I'm not sure. Bye.
The preceding program has been a presentation of the Angry Folk Media Empire.